Now that we completed our module on technology, we move on to the next one, which is one of the pillars, products. And what drive products? Cost. So we're going to talk about the different issues, the cost of ownership, how do you make revenue, pricing, and also operation. This is one of my favorite quotes from the movies. Revenue and profit model is how you bring money in. The business model are the activities that are responsible for your enterprise being able to create value. And a lot of people tend to mix those up. Valuation doesn't always make sense, meaning Snapchat can be worth $39 billion but lose $1 billion. How do they still operate? Oculus VR didn't even have a product for sale, yet it sold to Facebook for $2 billion. And what people are really doing is betting on the future, that the assets are going to be monetized, that Zuckerberg believed in Oculus because he thought VR was going to become, and it still may, a dominant platform. And so just like Facebook, just like Instagram, he's making another bet. Snapchat, they have 227 million captive viewers. The question is how do you squeeze money out of them? What your stakeholders want to know is, how much is it going to cost? What your stakeholders want to know depends on the point of view. For example, customers want to know, how much is it going to cost me to use your product? Investors want to know, what's your operating budget? And in terms of your customers and investors, how much are you going to charge, and how did you come up with that number? How do you predict how will you grow? There are 3 parts to the cost of ownership: installing it, operating it, and supporting it. And so costs fall into a number of different categories. One is variable cost, meaning dependent on the number produced, how much is it costing you? And so, for example, software is almost virtually zero because we're just talking about pennies in terms of memory space. On the other hand, something physical has a cost to it. Like if you're making a digital thermometer, it probably has a cost of about $2. So that's the variable cost. Fixed cost means it's independent of the number that you produce. So for example, insurance is a fixed cost. Recurring costs are things that continues during operation. For example, steel for the auto industry. Non-recurring costs mean I pay at one time. For example, laying down concrete or something like that. But there's major differences between physical and digital products. Here's what the costs are in physical products. So in terms of installation, it's all these things. And the things that are in blue are basically variable costs. Black are fixed costs. And you also have to consider burden. And burden means what you do is distribute all your overhead costs, like sales and things like that, or people getting benefits, or people taking vacation days. And they attribute it to essentially the salary of their employees. Now, here's an example of an actual cost of ownership. And I actually worked for the company Surfect, and as you could see, there's considerable savings. And so these are all the things that you need to think about in terms of cost of ownership. In terms of physical costs, it's called cost of goods sold, and that means what's the cost to produce one unit. Overhead costs are referred to as SG&A, which means sales, general costs like rent, and administrative costs like paying for your HR. R&D is considered to be in the overhead. Financial costs such as taxes, interest. And what it comes down to is the other costs are the same as cost of ownership. And so you see a lot of similarities. Digital businesses, do you have pipes where you're directing transactions, or you have platforms, which creates value for the users from other users. Cost of goods sold is much lower because of the low cost of physical plant. Overhead costs tend to drive your expenses. Fixed costs go into storing capacity and headcount. As you can imagine, AI costs are actually high because of all the power you have to use. And so these are the typical expenses that come in digital. And mostly they're driven by the overhead costs. Cost of customer acquisition is a very big part of your overhead costs. What does it cost for you to get at one? How many users do you need to make a network? And can I identify who all my customers are in some category, which is called a segment? Acquiring customers is a big chunk to startups. Here's an example of cost of customer acquisition, where in terms of sales cost, a big part that drives it is what's your success rate. And that kind of makes sense. The more successful I am, the more I can distribute those costs over lots of customers. And so I'll just let you read this over. I think it's pretty self-explanatory of how it works. Here's an example of the costs with the web. And what it comes down to is, are you targeting the right people because you need conversions? And that's what pretty much drives how well you can do. The thing is, in terms of web-based businesses, your conversion rate could be as low as 1 in 1,000. And this is why there's a lot of pressure on trying to find the right customers. Revenue. How do I make money? Well, gross profit is basically revenue minus your cost of goods sold. Cost of revenue is what you have in the SG&A. In terms of cost of revenue, it's acquisition, transaction costs, rental costs, depreciation, all that kind of stuff. In terms of you in a business, you're either a manufacturer, a landlord, meaning you own something and let other people use it. You're a contractor, meaning you borrow something to make money, or you're a distributor. You're a middleman. And so that's like Uber and eBay. Here are different examples of revenue that I will let you just read over. But what it comes down to is your revenue is, maybe you have a fixed revenue, like people pay $1,000 up front or something like that. And then it's price times the volume of what it is that you're actually selling. So here are lots of different examples for you to look at. In terms of digital revenue, pipes are straightforward. User acquisition is critical. Product design. Your users move your product in different directions. And so you need creators if you have a platform. And that's one of the big challenges. Who do you bill? The user or the creator? And this has to go into a lot of thought of what you're going to do. And this is why ads are so popular, because ads are straightforward. Who you bill is not that straightforward. Pandora makes $2 per user per year. Snapchat makes $4.81. Facebook makes $20. They know how to squeeze it out of you. And believe it or not, AOL still makes a lot of money. What it comes down to is the digital business is expected to reduce costs because you don't have all that infrastructure that a bricks and mortar business has. What kind of customers do you have? Do you have transactional buyers, meaning these are people who just stop by for a quick visit, like gas stations? Do you have a relationship customer, somebody who'll buy from you in the future? And so these are the people you can upsell, next sell, and cross-sell. And in terms of economics, what's the lifetime value I'm going to get out of a customer? And what does it cost for me to acquire them? Now, how do I figure out the lifetime value of a customer? Well, I could do it by brute force, which is what percentage do I retain, how frequently they purchase, and what's the gross margin. And plus also, do they buy secondary products like accessories? And so the model is basically, if it's infinite, it's the margin time retention rate divided by 1 plus the discount rate minus the retention rate. And the discount rate is how much profit that you want. The lifetime of the value of the customer is given by these equations. And that's assuming that you have infinite time. For those of you who remember geometric series, that's where it comes from. In terms of the lifetime value of a customer, you're concerned about churn. And that's that you're going to lose customers and you need to bring in new customers. It costs 4 to 10 times less to retain a customer than to go get a new one. And that kind of makes sense because your old customers already understand you. You don't have to spend money and time trying to get them to learn about you. You need to entice them to come back. How much does it cost to get to the first sale? Here's some example of fixed and variable costs that you incur. And so the cost is your fixed cost divided by the number of sales plus your variable costs. Key concepts: lifetime value of the customer. It's about frequency. How often do they buy? How much? And do they add value to you? Meaning, like, do they talk to other people? Do they promote you? We talked about COCA. Life cycle is basically how long is that product going to last? Time to purchase. How long does it take them to make up their mind? And once they buy something, what's the time to the next purchase? Rules of thumb is your lifetime value of the customer has to be at least 3 times more than the cost of customer acquisition. Low-cost consumables, you need those to be under 3 months. You can't sell a big bottle of something where they're only going to take a year because they're going to forget about you. Your cost of customer acquisition, you need to recoup within 12 months, preferably 6 months. So this is what happens in subscription businesses. You have to make your money back in a year. And high-cost consumables, those can go out as much as 12 months. And those are things like, air conditioning, screens and things like that, oil changes. And so here's some life cycle advantages. For example, shampoo, you only need one decision maker. But if you're talking about capital equipment, there could be more than 5 people involved in that. And their purchase time could be months. And their repurchase time could be pretty low. And that's why you're always selling these kind of people accessories. Pricing drives your bottom line. However, pricing evokes the biggest emotional response. And so what prices are driven by are the 3 C's. Who's your customer? Who's your competition? And what can the company offer your customer? Pricing is actually pretty straightforward. There's only 2 ways to price something. One is called value-based pricing, and that's how much is a customer willing to pay. And typically, they compare you to something else that already exists out there. But this is where in value-based pricing, emotion is a very big part. For example, everybody pays more for Apple, but in terms of pure performance, it's not much better than what the Android and PCs are offering. Cost-based pricing means, okay, I have my cost, and then I need to make a profit. And the question is, how big is that profit? Can companies collude on price and salary? Oh, you better bet they can. Technically, it's illegal, but here's what they do. They publish what they call the industry average. And so people see that. And so all of a sudden, things become fixed. Now, this kind of dates me, but when I was getting my PhD, the industry average for PhDs was 54,000. And I got 3 offers. And out of those 3 offers, everybody offered me 54,000. And so you could see the collusion there. And then what happened is the company I did join, and this is why you need smaller businesses, because they have a lot more flexibility. They offered me 60, so I grabbed that. The thing is, cost base sets the floor, the minimum I can charge. Value base is driven by the 5 C's. And in terms of your tactical strategy, this is where lock in and lock out, things like that, become really important. In terms of pricing, what it comes down to, it's about the perception of value. And so this is a function of decision making. And what kind of buyer types do you have? Are these hedonistic people? This is why, quite frankly, candy bars are so well overpriced. Is this low involvement? For example, insurance. People just renew it. They don't think about changing it. And a friend took me out to have a steak, and he was using a ton of sour cream, and they finally told him, if you want another tub of sour cream, it's going to cost you 50 cents. And he just went right through the roof. And it was a silly discussion because, look, I mean, he kept obsessing about it so much. And then I said, look, I'll pay for it. There's $1. And he said, I don't care. It's the principle. And that's what perception does. What does it take you to buy a $3,500 computer or a $5,000 suit? Price psychology is the price is equal to the perceived value times the risk times the urgency. These are the things that drive how people buy things. And what perceived value comes from our reference points, framing, decision bias, and competition. And we'll go into those things. For example, perceived value. Do you look at a Mercedes-Benz differently than what you would expect for a Toyota? In terms of risk, for investors, they're betting on a person. What's the risk of them being successful? And in terms of context, for example, if you have a cure for migraines, a person having a migraine is going to pay a lot for it. What it comes down to is people make wagers, but here's the truth about how much they're willing to pay. If you reduce loss, which means it's reducing pain, they're willing to take bets on paying more for something. They'll take a chance. On the other hand, in terms of gain, it's exactly the opposite. If you're talking about big stakes, big risk, then people are just going to take the gain. For example, if I told you I'm going to give you $1,000, and you could win $5,000 if you call heads or tails right. And so probability says you do that. On the other hand, most people, I'm just going to keep the 1,000. In terms of pricing strategies, there's low pricing, which is called penetration pricing. There's neutral pricing, which is about how much you think it's worth. And then there's skimming or premium pricing. And that's that you set that there's rarity or something like that, and you could charge a lot more. You need to find your level to operate. The way people approach pricing is, first of all, look at analogous products. For example, a friend of mine was actually in charge of XM radio. And they were in charge of like putting satellites up in the sky and stuff like that. And XM radio, when it came out, they were charging $19.95 a month. And I said, it's too high. And they said, why is it too high? And I said, people are paying under $10 for their phone service, something they use every day. Your radio, unless you're a long-haul trucker or something like that, you don't use every day. And so what ended up happening is that pretty much they hit the chasm and their sales flattened out, and then they had to drop the price down. Your price point is you have to discuss with a lot of people, and where are your competition's price point? Elasticity, meaning if you change the price, how much flexibility do your customers have? And your early customers become lighthouse customers for other people. You have to handle these people delicately. Now, here are some economic behaviors that people have. And this is what the framing effect is. The fairness effect. Do you feel like you're being treated fairly? If you don't, then it doesn't matter where you set the price. You won't get over it. Share cost effect. You're willing to pay more if you're sharing the cost with someone else. And you can read the rest. When I set pricing, I want to gain market share. There's psychological issues with pricing, and that's why the last digit is always odd. Somebody did a big study about it, and it's just true. There are economic issues, meaning what's my ROI going to be? Am I skimming? In terms of strategic, maybe I create this product because I know I have complements I can also sell. And digital is basically time-based. And one of your other biggest challenges in digital is freemium. And as you can see, freemium is getting less and less and less. People find they need to have you pay up. Now, red ocean, blue ocean. There's the red ocean, where competition and everybody's a shark and nobody makes a lot of money. And then there's the blue ocean, where you have no competition and you don't have to worry about anything. Red ocean, blue ocean, I do not teach anymore. For the simple reason, it doesn't work. You cannot design to it. And most people don't think it's a thing anymore, and it really isn't. And even if you can find a market that's a blue ocean, it will, the moment you establish you can make money in a market, it will turn red very quickly. And so blue ocean tends to emphasize lower price features. Now, there's something in the middle between these, and that's what's called the reef. And that's that you came up with a product that is unique and the best in its category. So it's differentiated from everyone else. So don't go for the mass market and have to go up against corporations, because that's what they're good at, and they'll just kill you. What you need to do is do what Gates did. Find a bunker product. You can charge more for it, like Gates did. And then let yourself grow and incubate in a reef. Remember Finding Nemo? What do fish do? They hide out in a reef, and then when time comes, they leave. Now, in terms of profit times volume, it takes a while for you to get high enough volume where you can make strong profits. This is where the corporations are. This is where you should be, where yes, you have lower volumes, but you can charge more. And if you end up in the middle, this is called the trough of sorrow. This is where I'm not selling enough in volume to get economies of scale and things like that, which would make me profitable. The thing is, in Shark Tank, this is where people end up. Now, you want to operate there. And what happens is eventually you want to get over here. And so you're going to have to go through the trough of sorrow. And so you need a plan of speed and scale that you'll get through this quickly. And this is where Shark Tank contestants are. This is why people get in front of everyone. They said, I'm making $300,000 a year, but I can't make a profit. And I mortgaged my house and I spent all this money. And then what do they say? Cuban says, I'm going to pass. They know this is a quagmire. It's going to take a ton of money to get you out of the trough of sorrow, because these people never had a plan of how they're going to get through this. And so you need a large enough foxhole where you can tread water. The budget components are you have to pay for personnel. Is there equipment involved? Materials. And of course your overhead. And here's an example of a spreadsheet. Very simple. But this is one for a startup. And so your salary and benefits, your materials, your overhead costs, and a summary of what your yearly budget's going to be. In terms of the government, budget is done by this: labor, direct materials, overhead. Yes, the government allows you to charge for overhead, your fees, G&A, and the government also allows you to charge a 5% fee, so you can make a profit. Oops, that's a 6% fee. Your budget, You have limited funds. You need to treat your money like they're gold. I mean, don't throw it away. Long-term, avoid long-term burdens. For example, if you're a startup, don't sign a lease for 12 or 24 months. You may not have a choice with the 12 months, but if you can make it month to month or shorter, do it. Maybe you have to pay a little bit more, but it's better for you because you need that extra cash. Trade-offs. You make the assumption you have less money now, but you'll have more in the future. And so those are the things you trade off against. And earned value is if your money isn't related to building a product or getting revenue, then you're wasting your time. Everything you do should be an earned value activity. Pay attention. A lot of startups are really bad at tracking their finances, and that's why they go under quickly. You have to constantly be looking for cash. If you're 6 months out from going under, then you need to start pounding the pavement and looking for cash. Here's an example of an actual real company, Buffer, that does social media analytics and scheduling services. And this is a company that makes $7.8 million a year. You can go through this and see what charges you actually have in a digital business. So we reviewed cost and price, also profit. We talked about the different product types, physical and digital. Revenue models, they vary, but it comes down to whether you produce, rent, transact, or distribute. You have to be concerned with churn. And always remember, cash is your lifeblood. The longer you can make your cash last, the longer you're going to last.